The stars outside the viewport were cold and distant, just like the galaxy that surrounded them. Commander Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of his patrol ship, the Meridian, watching the endless darkness stretch before him. His crew worked quietly at their stations, running scans, checking systems, and keeping watch over a sector of space that most species in the galaxy did not even know existed. For 300 years, humanity had done this work. They patrolled the borders. They maintained the hyperspace beacons that allowed ships to travel safely between stars. They staffed medical stations in war zones and negotiated peace treaties between species that refused to speak directly to each other. They built, they fixed, they protected, and they served, and nobody ever said thank you. Nathan turned as his second in command. Lieutenant Laura Bennett walked up beside him. She held a datapad in her hands, and her face showed the same tired frustration that Nathan had grown used to seeing. "The Galactic Accord rejected our commendation request again," she said. "They said our actions during the Dasari refugee crisis were simply part of our expected duties." Nathan took the datapad and looked at it briefly before handing it back. During the refugee crisis, his crew had worked for 72 hours straight without sleep. They had rescued over 40,000 Dasari, civilians from a dying space station, while the Dasari military stood by and watched. 3 of his crew members had died during the operation, and the Galactic Accord called it expected duties. "File it with the others," Nathan said. Quietly, Laura nodded and walked away. She knew better than to argue. They all did. The Galactic Accord was the governing body of known space. It was led by 3 elder races who had existed for thousands of years, before humanity ever left Earth. The Valorians were beings made of living crystal, beautiful and cold and convinced of their own superiority. The Dasari were an aquatic species with great intelligence and even greater pride. The Carven were insectoid creatures who lived in massive hive colonies and viewed all other species as inferior. These 3 races made the decisions that shaped the galaxy. They sat in their marble towers and debated policy while humans did the actual work of keeping civilization running. When a plague broke out on a distant world, humans were sent to contain it. When pirates threatened a trade route, humans were sent to stop them. When a hyperspace beacon malfunctioned and threatened to strand thousands of ships, humans were sent to fix it. The elder races had the power and the glory. Humans had the calluses and the scars. On Earth, in a room buried deep beneath the surface, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Ambassador Daniel Pierce sat at a long table across from Secretary of Defense Michelle Torres and President Catherine Hayes. The room was windowless and protected by layers of security that even the most advanced alien technology could not penetrate. What was discussed here would never leave these walls. The vote was unanimous, Daniel said. Every human colony, every outpost, every settlement has agreed. We proceed with the Exodus Protocol. Catherine leaned back in her chair and looked at the holographic display that floated above the table. It showed a map of known space with human-occupied territories marked in blue. There were thousands of worlds, millions of installations, billions of people spread across the galaxy like a vast and invisible web. 300 years, Catherine said softly. We have given them 300 years of service. We have bled for them. We have died for them. And they still treat us like servants. Michelle nodded grimly. Last month, the Valorian High Council proposed a resolution to limit human expansion. They said we were spreading too quickly and needed to be controlled. The Dasari and Carven supported it without hesitation. Controlled, Daniel repeated the word with disgust. We maintain their civilization. We keep their people safe. We do the work they consider beneath them. And they want to control us. The 3 of them sat in silence for a long moment. The decision had not been made lightly. It had been discussed and debated for decades, passed down through generations of human leaders who had watched and waited and hoped that things might change. But things had not changed. The galaxy still saw humanity as useful tools, convenient when needed and easily forgotten when not. The Exodus Protocol was humanity's answer to 3 centuries of disrespect. Every human in the galaxy would leave at the same moment. They would take everything with them, every piece of technology they had built, every system they had designed, every bit of knowledge they had accumulated. They would vanish without warning, without explanation, without giving the elder races any chance to prepare. And then the galaxy would learn exactly how much it had depended on the species it had dismissed as insignificant. "When do we begin?" Catherine asked. "Midnight, Galactic Standard Time," Daniel replied. 3 days from now. The transport ships are already in position. Every human has received their instructions through secure channels. The elder races suspect nothing. Michelle pulled up another display showing the current status of human personnel across the galaxy. Millions of engineers maintaining carven food production facilities. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers patrolling the Sari borders. Countless technicians keeping Valorian environmental systems running. All of them ready to disappear at a moment's notice. "They have no idea how much we do," Michelle said. "They have never bothered to find out. They just assume that everything works because everything has always worked." Catherine stood and walked to the edge of the room where a small viewport showed the night sky above Earth. The stars looked the same as they always had, distant and cold and uncaring. But humanity had walked among those stars for 300 years. They had made them safer. They had made them better. And they had received nothing but contempt in return. "No warnings," Catherine said firmly. "No negotiations. No demands. We simply leave and we let them face the consequences of their arrogance." Daniel and Michelle nodded in agreement. 3 days later, the Exodus began. It happened in perfect silence, without ceremony or announcement. One moment, humanity was everywhere in the galaxy, quietly holding civilization together. The next moment, they were gone, and the elder races who had taken them for granted for 300 years were about to discover just how dark the galaxy could become without the people they had never bothered to appreciate. Commander Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the Meridian as it slipped into the void, leaving behind a patrol route that would never be patrolled again. He did not look back. None of them did. They had given enough. Now it was time for the galaxy to give something back. The night was quiet on Valorian Prime. High Counselor Tharos finished his evening meditation in the crystal chamber of his palace, feeling the familiar hum of energy that flowed through his ancient body. He had lived for over 2,000 years and had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched humanity arrive in the galaxy as primitive newcomers and had observed them spread across the stars like a persistent weed. Useful, he had always thought. Humans were useful in the way that tools were useful. You did not thank a hammer for driving nails. You simply expected it to work. When Tharos emerged from his chamber the next morning, he noticed immediately that something was different. The hallways of his palace, usually bustling with human servants attending to various tasks, were completely empty. The soft hum of the atmospheric processors sounded slightly wrong, a pitch higher than normal. The temperature had dropped by several degrees. He walked through corridor after corridor, finding no one. The kitchens were empty. The maintenance rooms were abandoned. Every human who had worked in his palace for the past century had vanished without a trace. Tharos felt the first flicker of something he had not experienced in a very long time. It was not quite fear. It was confusion. Humans did not simply leave. They were not allowed to simply leave. Across the galaxy, the same scene repeated itself billions of times. Dr. Kevin, Park had been the chief engineer at the Carven shipyards for 20 years. He knew every system in the massive facility, every quirk and fault and hidden danger. The Carven supervisors had never learned any of it. They did not need to learn. Humans handled the details while Carven took the credit. On the night of the Exodus, Kevin gathered his entire human crew in the main engineering bay. They moved quickly and quietly, packing personal belongings and erasing sensitive data from the computer systems. The Carvens slept in their hive chambers above, their mandibles clicking softly in dreams of conquest and expansion. "Everything is set," Kevin told his team. "The reactors will run on automatic for about 6 days before they need manual adjustment. After that, well, it is not our problem anymore." A young engineer named Amy Carter looked worried. What if they figure out how to fix things? What if they learn? Kevin smiled sadly. "We have been here for 60 years, and they have never bothered to learn anything. They will not start now. They never believed they needed to." The transport ships arrived in the darkness, unmarked and silent. Within 2 hours, every human at the Carven shipyards had departed. They left behind a facility that looked perfectly normal, with all systems running smoothly. But the people who understood those systems, who could fix them when they broke, who knew where the weaknesses lay, were gone, on the outer rim of the sorry space. Lieutenant Commander Samantha Gray led her squadron away from Outpost Sigma 7. This station had been humanity's first line of defense against the horrors that lurked in the void between galaxies. Creatures older than stars, mindless things that fed on energy and light and anything else they could consume. For generations, human soldiers had fought and died, keeping these monsters away from civilized space. The Thesari had never appreciated this sacrifice. They complained constantly about the human military presence in their territory. Too aggressive, they said. Too violent. Too human. Now they would have the peace they had demanded. Samantha took one last look at the sensor screens before boarding her transport. Already she could see movement in the distant darkness. The void predators knew when prey was unguarded. They had been waiting for centuries, held back only by human vigilance. Now that vigilance was ending. "Let them come," Samantha whispered to herself. "Let them see what we protected them from." On Earth, the final phase of the Exodus was underway. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were being carefully dismantled and loaded on the massive arc ships. Entire ecosystems were preserved and transported. Forests and oceans and mountains converted into data and energy and reassembled elsewhere. The technology to do this had never been shared with the galaxy. It had never been asked for, so it had never been offered. President Catherine Hayes stood on the observation deck of the colony ship New Dawn, watching her homeworld grow smaller in the distance. The blue oceans and green continents that had given birth to humanity were disappearing into the darkness of space. It was a loss that hurt deeply, but it was also a necessary sacrifice. Admiral Christopher Lane stood beside her, monitoring the final departure statistics on his datapad. "All human assets confirmed evacuated," he reported. "Every colony, every outpost, every ship. 300 billion people moved without a single casualty." Catherine nodded slowly. "And the Accord?" "The early warning systems show nothing unusual. Their sensors are all reading normal. They have no idea we are leaving." "Of course, they do not," Catherine said. "We built those systems. We designed those sensors. We knew exactly how to leave without triggering any alarms." The New Dawn turned away from Earth and accelerated toward the coordinates that only humans knew. Behind them, the solar system that had been humanity's home for millions of years fell silent and dark. The sun still burned. The planets still orbited, but the species that had named them and mapped them and loved them was gone. Across the galaxy, the same story unfolded in perfect coordination. Human doctors walked away from hospitals in the middle of the night. Human engineers abandoned power plants and water treatment facilities. Human soldiers left their posts on border stations and patrol routes. Human merchants closed their shops and human teachers left their schools, and human pilots powered down their ships for the last time. By morning, Galactic Standard Time, it was over. Every human in known space had vanished. They left behind empty buildings and silent machines and a galaxy that was about to learn a very painful lesson. The elder races woke to find their servants gone. At first, they were annoyed. Then they were confused. Then, as the hours passed and the true scope of the departure became clear, they began to feel something they had never felt before. They felt afraid, because the humans had not just left. They had taken everything with them. Every bit of knowledge about how things worked. Every manual, every schematic, every piece of documentation. They had left behind technology that nobody else understood and systems that nobody else could maintain. The galaxy had spent 3 centuries treating humanity like furniture. Useful and invisible and easily replaced. Now that furniture was gone, and the elder races were about to discover just how empty their houses truly were. The silence of the Exodus was complete. And in that silence, the first cracks were already beginning to form. High Counselor Tharos realized that something was seriously wrong when his breakfast did not arrive. For 2,000 years, he had never needed to think about food. It simply appeared, prepared by human servants who knew exactly what his crystalline body required. Now his dining hall stood empty, the kitchen cold and silent. He summoned his guards and demanded answers. They had none to give. Every human in the palace had vanished during the night. Every human in the capital city had vanished. Every human on Valorian Prime had vanished. Tharos contacted the other members of the High Council and found them equally confused. Communications were flooding in from across the Empire, all carrying the same impossible message. The humans were gone. All of them. Everywhere. This is some kind of protest, Councilor Myra declared during their emergency meeting. They are hiding somewhere, trying to make a point. Find them and punish them for this insolence. But searches turned up nothing. The humans had not hidden. They had simply ceased to exist within Valorian space. By noon, the first real crisis emerged. The atmospheric processors in Tharos's palace began to malfunction. Warning lights flickered across control panels that nobody knew how to read. Error messages appeared in a human language that no Valorian had ever bothered to learn. "Get the technical staff," Tharos commanded. His guard looked at him with something close to embarrassment. The technical staff were human, High Counselor. All of them. Tharos felt his crystal form flicker with anger and something else. Something he did not want to name. He walked to the nearest control panel and stared at it. Buttons and switches and displays covered its surface, each one labeled with symbols that meant nothing to him. He had lived in this palace for 800 years, and he had never once looked at these controls. He had never needed to. Humans handled such things. He pressed a button at random. Somewhere deep in the palace, something made a grinding noise and stopped working. The Valorian Senate declared a state of emergency by evening. Reports were coming in from across the Empire. Power failures on 3 colony worlds. Life support malfunctions on 17 space stations. The entire Imperial communication network was experiencing errors that nobody could diagnose, let alone fix, across the galaxy. The Thazari faced their own nightmare. Ambassador Vexari received the initial reports with disbelief. 90% of Thazari shipping relied on human navigation software. This software had been installed decades ago, maintained by human technicians, updated by human programmers. The Thazari had never asked how it worked. They had simply used it. Now that software had stopped working. Ships attempting to engage their hyperspace drives found themselves locked out of their own systems. Error messages demanded human authorization codes that no Thesari possessed. Thousands of vessels drifted helplessly in space, their crews unable to plot even the simplest course corrections. How is this possible? Vexari demanded of her advisors. We paid for that software. We own it. Apparently not, Ambassador, her chief scientist replied grimly. The licensing agreements were very specific. We paid for the right to use the software while human technicians maintained it. Without those technicians, the licenses have expired. Then we will write our own software. The scientist was quiet for a long moment. Ambassador, we do not know how. Our engineers have spent 300 years relying on human systems. We never developed our own expertise. We did not think we needed to. On Carven Prime, the situation was even more desperate. The great hive worlds depended entirely on food synthesis plants designed by human engineers. These plants converted raw materials into the nutrient paste that fed billions of Carven workers. Without humans to maintain them, the plants began to fail within days. Hive Queen Zara summoned her advisors and demanded solutions. They brought her reports instead. The food plants used technology that no Carven understood. The operating manuals were written in human languages. The replacement parts had been manufactured in human factories on worlds that no longer responded to communications. How long do we have? Zara asked. Perhaps 6 months, if we ration carefully. After that, mass starvation will begin. Zara had ruled her hive for 300 years. She had conquered enemies and expanded her territory and built one of the greatest empires in Carven history. Now she sat in her throne room and realized that her entire civilization might end because nobody knew how to make food machines work. The Galactic Accord called an emergency session. The great chamber on Neutral Station Prime felt strange and empty. The human delegation seats had been removed during the night, as if they had never existed. Representatives from 100 species crowded into the remaining space, their voices rising in confusion and anger. This is an act of war, Councillor Tharos declared. The humans have abandoned their posts without permission. They have sabotaged our systems. They must be found and punished. Ambassador Vexari stood slowly. And how do you propose we find them, Counselor? Our navigation systems no longer work. Our communication networks are failing. Half our fleet is stranded in deep space. Surely we have records of their destination. Travel permits, flight plans, something. We do not. Humans were never required to file such documentation. We trusted them to be where they were supposed to be. Vexari paused. We trusted them completely, and we never once asked what would happen if they left. From the Outer Rim came reports that made everything else seem trivial. The Void Predators were moving. These ancient creatures, held back for centuries by human patrol ships, had sensed the departure of their enemies. Now they emerged from the darkness between galaxies. Hungry and terrible and completely unopposed. The first attack came on a Thesari mining colony. The predators descended without warning, consuming ships and stations and people with equal appetite. The colony's distress signal went unanswered. There was no one left to answer it. Within 3 weeks, 6 more colonies had fallen. The predators were spreading through the Thesari space like a plague, destroying everything in their path. The Thesari military, designed for political maneuvering rather than actual combat, crumbled against enemies that could not be negotiated with or bribed or frightened away. The galaxy had spent 300 years treating humanity as a convenience. Now that convenience was gone, and the elder races were discovering that their entire civilization had been built on a foundation they had never bothered to understand. The first cracks had appeared. Soon, those cracks would become chasms, and the proud empires that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant would face a choice between humility and extinction. 3 months after the humans vanished, the galaxy was dying. High Counselor Tharos stood in the ruins of what had once been the proudest throne room in the Valorian Empire. The crystal walls had lost their shine. The environmental systems had failed weeks ago, and the temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. Half the lights no longer worked. The once magnificent palace looked like a tomb. His empire had shrunk from 1,000 star systems to just one. The colony worlds had gone dark, one after another, as life support systems failed and populations either fled or perished. Ships that attempted to reach them found the hyperspace routes unstable and unpredictable. Many never returned. The Valorians had built their civilization on the assumption that certain things would always work. Power would always flow. Air would always be clean. Food would always be available. They had never asked who made these things happen. They had simply expected them to continue forever. Now Tharos understood the truth. Humans had made everything work. Humans had maintained every system, fixed every problem, prevented every disaster before it could begin. And the Valorians had never noticed because they had never looked. On the Sari Prime, the situation was worse. Admiral Vexthos had gathered what remained of the Zari fleet for a final defense against the Void Predators. These creatures had consumed entire sectors of space since the humans departed. They moved without pattern or purpose, driven only by endless hunger. Worlds that had thrived for millennia were now empty husks, stripped of all energy and life. The Admiral looked at his fleet on the tactical display. 47 ships, most of them damaged, many running on minimal power. Against him came a swarm of predators, numbering in the thousands. It was not a battle. It was a sacrifice. All ships, Vexthos Diaz announced over the communication system. Today we fight for our homeworld. Today we show these monsters that the Zari are not prey. Today we prove that we do not need humans to protect us. The battle lasted 11 minutes. The Void Predators tore through the Zari fleet like wind through paper. Ships exploded. Crews died. Admiral Vexthos watched his tactical display fill with red markers, indicating destroyed vessels, until finally his own flagship was breached. In his last moments. Floating in the cold vacuum of space, Vexthos thought about all the times he had complained about human soldiers. Too aggressive, he had said. Too violent. Too eager to fight. Now he understood. Humans had not been eager to fight. They had simply known what was waiting in the darkness, and they had refused to let it win. They had died for species that despised them, protecting worlds that would never acknowledge their sacrifice, and Vexthos had mocked them for it. On Carvan Prime, the food rationing had failed. The Hive Queens had distributed their emergency reserves as fairly as they could, but there had never been enough for 3 billion people. Now the hunger had begun, and with it came violence. Workers who had lived peacefully together for generations now fought over scraps. Entire hive sections turned against each other, driven mad by starvation. The queens tried to maintain order, but their authority meant nothing to beings whose children were dying. Hive Queen Zara sat alone in her empty council chamber, listening to the sounds of chaos echoing through her once great civilization. She had ruled for 300 years. She had built an empire, and now she would watch it consume itself because nobody had ever learned how to grow food without human help. The Galactic Accord met one final time. The Great Chamber was less than half full. Many species had already collapsed entirely. Others were too busy fighting for survival to send representatives. Those who remained looked nothing like the proud delegates who had once debated policy and passed judgment on lesser races. Ambassador Vexari stood before them. Her scales had lost their color. Her eyes showed exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. She had not slept properly in weeks. None of them had. "We must find the humans," she said. We must apologize for everything we have done. We must beg them to return." Counselor Tharos spoke from his place, his crystal form dim and cracked. "Leg? We are the elder races. We do not beg. Then we die," Vexari replied simply. "Without humans, we have perhaps 6 months before complete civilizational collapse. Our food supplies are exhausted. Our technology is failing. The void predators are consuming everything in their path. There is no other option." Silence filled the chamber. Every delegate knew she was right. They had spent 3 centuries treating humanity as servants, and now they faced the consequences of that arrogance. "How do we find them?" asked a Carvan representative. "They left no trace. Our sensors cannot detect them. Our ships cannot travel safely through hyperspace." Vexari nodded slowly. "We broadcast a message. Every frequency, every channel, every method we still have available. We tell them we were wrong. We tell them we need them. We ask them to come back. And if they refuse?" Tharos asked. "Then we have nothing to lose by asking." The message went out that night. It was transmitted from every functioning communication array in known space, repeated endlessly in every language the elder races could remember. It was a message of surrender, of admission, of desperate hope. To humanity, it began. "We were wrong. We failed to see your value. We failed to appreciate your sacrifices. We failed to treat you as equals. Now we face extinction, and we understand what you meant to us. Please come back. Please help us. We will give you anything you ask. We will change. We will do better. Please do not let us die." The message echoed through empty space for weeks. No response came. The elder races had spent 300 years ignoring humanity's contributions. Now humanity was ignoring their pleas. But somewhere, in a distant corner of the galaxy that no alien sensor could reach, the message was received. President Catherine Hayes listened to it in silence, her face showing nothing. Beside her, Admiral Christopher Lane and Ambassador Daniel Pierce waited for her decision. "They are suffering," Daniel said quietly. "Millions have already died. Millions more will follow." Catherine nodded. "I know. Do we let them?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. She thought about 300 years of service without thanks. She thought about soldiers who had died protecting ungrateful worlds. She thought about scientists and engineers and doctors who had given everything and received nothing but contempt. Then she thought about who humanity was supposed to be. "No," she said finally. "We do not let them die. But this time, things will be different. This time, they will see us as we truly are." She turned to her communications officer. "Send a reply. Tell them we are willing to talk." The human ship appeared at the edge of known space like a ghost from another world. It was a single vessel, small and unremarkable, but its arrival sent shockwaves through what remained of galactic civilization. Every communication channel erupted with frantic messages. Every surviving sensor array turned toward this tiny point of light. After 6 months of silence, humanity had finally answered. Commander Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the Meridian, the same ship he had commanded during the Exodus. Around him, his crew watched their screens with quiet satisfaction. The galaxy that had ignored them for 3 centuries was now desperate for their attention. "We are receiving over 10,000 communication requests," Lieutenant Laura Bennett reported. "Every species still capable of transmitting is trying to reach us." Nathan nodded slowly. "Let them wait. We speak only to the Galactic Accord." The negotiations were arranged to take place on neutral ground, a dead world called Terminus that had once been a thriving human colony. The alien delegates arrived in whatever ships they could still operate, their vessels battered and barely functional. They stepped onto the surface of a planet that showed them exactly what they had lost: The human buildings still stood, perfectly preserved but completely empty. The streets were clean. The gardens were maintained by automated systems. Everything worked exactly as it should, a painful reminder that humanity had always known how to build things that lasted. President Catherine Hayes met the alien delegates in the central plaza. She was flanked by Admiral Christopher Lane and Ambassador Daniel Pierce, along with a small honor guard of human soldiers. They wore no weapons. They did not need to. High Counselor Tharos led the alien delegation. He moved slowly, his crystalline form cracked and faded from months of deprivation. Behind him came Ambassador Vexari, her once proud bearing reduced to exhausted gratitude. Hive Queen Zara brought up the rear, her massive form thin from rationing, her compound eyes showing emotions that Carven were not supposed to feel. They had come to beg. They all knew it. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Catherine spoke first. Her voice was calm and measured, carrying no anger or satisfaction or triumph. She simply stated facts. For 300 years, humanity served this galaxy. We maintained your infrastructure. We protected your borders. We healed your sick and fed your hungry. We did this freely, asking only for respect and recognition in return. You gave us neither. The alien delegates remained silent. There was nothing they could say. When we left, your civilization collapsed within months. Your technology failed because nobody understood how it worked. Your people starved because nobody knew how to grow food. Your enemies attacked because nobody was willing to fight them. You learned, too late, what we had been doing all along. Catherine paused and looked at each of the alien leaders in turn. Tharos, who had treated humans as furniture. Vexari, who had dismissed human concerns as unimportant. Zara, who had exploited human labor without a single word of thanks. They were all here now, humbled and desperate and finally willing to listen. We did not leave to punish you, Catherine continued. We left because we were tired. Tired of being ignored. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of giving everything and receiving nothing. We left because you made it clear that you did not want us, and we finally believed you. We were wrong, Tharos said. The words seemed to cost him physical pain. We were blind and arrogant and foolish. We see that now. Yes, Catherine agreed. You were. The question is whether you have truly changed or whether you are simply saying what you think we want to hear. Vexari stepped forward. What can we do to prove ourselves? What do you want from us? Catherine smiled slightly. It was not a cruel smile, but it was not entirely warm either. We want what we should have had from the beginning. Full representation on the Galactic Accord. Recognition of human sovereignty over human space. Fair compensation for human labor. And acknowledgement, public and permanent, of the debt that can never truly be repaid. The alien delegates looked at each other. These terms would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. They would have been rejected with outrage and contempt. Now, they seemed almost reasonable. We accept, Tharos said. All of it. Without condition or negotiation. There is one more thing, Catherine added. This time, we teach you. We share our knowledge. We help you build the capability to maintain your own civilization. Because we will not be servants again. We will be partners, or we will be nothing. Vexari nodded eagerly. Yes, we will learn. Our scientists are engineers, everyone who is willing. We will do whatever it takes. Catherine extended her hand. It was such a simple human gesture, one that the elder races had never understood. But Tharos reached out with his crystalline appendage and touched her palm, sealing an agreement that would reshape the galaxy forever. The recovery took years. Human ships returned to dead colonies and reactivated systems that had been dormant for months. Human engineers taught alien students the basics of technology they had used their entire lives without understanding. Human soldiers drove back the Void Predators, reclaiming territory that had been lost to darkness. But this time, everything was different. When human crews arrived at a space station, the alien inhabitants thanked them. When human doctors saved lives, their patients remembered their names. When human soldiers fell in battle, monuments were built in their honor. The Galactic Accord was reformed with human representatives holding equal power to the elder races. Decisions that had once been made without human input now required human approval. The species that had been dismissed as convenient servants were now respected as essential partners. On the anniversary of the return, Admiral Christopher Lane stood beside Commander Nathan Cole on the observation deck of humanity's new flagship, the Starship Covenant. Below them, 100 worlds glittered with renewed life. Ships moved along trade routes that were safe and stable. Colonies thrived on planets that had once been death traps. Do you think they have really changed? Nathan asked. Christopher considered the question carefully. He thought about all the times he had heard alien leaders complain about human presence. He thought about the centuries of disrespect and dismissal. He thought about colleagues who had died protecting people who had never acknowledged their sacrifice. I think they have learned, he said finally. Whether that learning lasts is up to them. But at least now, they know what they stand to lose. Nathan smiled and turned back to the stars. Humanity had finally taken its rightful place among the elder races. Not through conquest or violence, but through the simple act of stepping away and letting the galaxy see what it had always taken for granted. The thankless guardians were thankless no more, and the galaxy would never forget what it had almost lost. Some lessons are only learned through loss. Some debts can only be paid through suffering, and some species only understand the value of what they have when it is gone. Humanity had taught the galaxy all 3 lessons. Now it was time to build something better together.